The Spartan fell to his knees before he even realized he had been struck, not by a blade, not by an enemy, but by the crushing weight of his own failure. For a man raised since childhood to believe that honor is breath, that duty is marrow, and that weakness is a crime, failure is not an event, it is a sentence. In those first burning moments, he could hear nothing except the echo of what he should have done, the decision he didn't make, the hesitation that cost him everything. His brothers stood around him in silence, not accusing, not comforting, just watching. And sometimes that is worse. If this moment is already gripping you, warrior, se essa historia está te decando, cometa aquiem baxo dian voca está assistindo e que hora sao I. The Spartan rose slowly, every muscle trembling not from the wound, but from the shame. He remembered the teachings carved into him since boyhood. A Spartan is not allowed to fall unless he rises twice as hard. But rising felt impossible. His mind replayed the failure like a cruel soldier marching in endless circles. He had misjudged the enemy's flank. He had reacted too late. He had trusted strength when he should have trusted discipline. And now, warriors he respected, men who had bled beside him, lay injured because of his mistake. He looked at their faces. None of them spat insults. None of them blamed him. But their silence, that was the blade that cut deepest. Because a Spartan knows when your brothers say nothing, it is because they expect you to speak through your actions. So he stood there on the dry earth, dust rising around him like the ghosts of his ancestors, and he made a vow, not aloud, but in the furnace of his chest. He would restore his honor, not by excuses, not by begging forgiveness, but by carving a new truth into the battlefield. He would prove first to himself, then to Sparta, that a man is not defined by the moment he breaks, but by the moment he decides to rise again. The silence followed him long after the battlefield dust settled. A Spartan can endure pain. He can endure hunger, exhaustion, even death. But what he cannot easily endure is the quiet judgment of those who once marched at his side. When he walked through the agora, the elders didn't reprimand him. They didn't demand an explanation. They didn't lecture him on what he should have done. Instead, they simply watched him pass, eyes steady, unreadable, as if waiting to see what kind of man would emerge from the ashes of his own mistake. And that is the cruelty of Spartan silence. It demands accountability, not apology. If this pressure grips your chest, warrior, if you've ever felt the weight of others' expectations after you failed them, then know this: you are standing in the same shadow he stood in. At night, when the rest of the barracks slept, he lay awake staring at the rafters above him. The flickering torchlight painted the room in shifting gold, turning his doubts into dancing shapes on the ceiling. Every whisper of the wind sounded like the unspoken question hanging over him. Who are you now? He had seen warriors break under less. Some hid, some blamed, some pretended nothing had happened. But a Spartan cannot escape himself. A Spartan faces the truth with the same discipline he faces the spear. So he forced himself to revisit the moment of failure again and again until the memory was no longer a wound, but a map of every miscalculation, every hesitation, every flaw in his judgment. And with each replay, one truth carved itself deeper into his mind: you cannot restore your honor by avoiding the place where you lost it. He began noticing the shift in how others interacted with him. His brothers still offered him space in the shield wall. They still trained beside him. But every gesture came with that same heavy quiet, a quiet that said, "We are watching the man you choose to become." And in that silence, he found something unexpected, not condemnation, not disappointment, but faith. They believed he could rise, otherwise they wouldn't have bothered watching at all. And you, warrior, what do people see in your silence? Do they see a man collapsing under failure, or a man gathering himself before the storm? For the Spartan, the answer began to take shape, not in words, not in promises, but in the calm, steel resolve settling into his bones as he prepared for what must come next: the path of atonement, a path walked alone, a path where silence is not an enemy, but a mirror. The Spartan left the city before dawn, when the world was still painted in cold shades of blue, and the air carried the weight of unspoken promises. No fanfare, no escort, no farewell, just the steady rhythm of his footsteps as he walked toward the mountains into the harsh solitude, where only truth survives. This was not exile. This was choice, because a Spartan knows you cannot rebuild yourself where you broke. You must walk into the wilderness and face the version of you that failed. The path was steep and merciless. Stones tore at his sandals, branches sliced at his arms, and the icy wind clawed at his skin. But he embraced every sting, every ache. Pain was not punishment. It was purification. If you've ever stepped away from the world to confront your own mess, your own consequences, then you understand this journey more than you admit. Se essa historia esta te tocando. Comenta aqui embaixo diante voca esta assistindo e que horas são I. By midday, sweat poured from him despite the cold. By evening, his legs trembled with exhaustion. But he did not stop. Stopping would mean letting the past catch him, and he was determined to outrun the man he had been. When night fell, he reached the base of an old stone outpost, long abandoned, barely standing, yet still defiant against time. It reminded him of what he sought to become. Inside, he lit no fire. Spartans are not warmed by comfort, they are forged by hardship. He sat in the darkness with only the sound of his breath echoing through the hollow room. Then, finally, he allowed himself to speak aloud. Not excuses, not self-pity, but truth. He dissected every mistake with the precision of a surgeon. He admitted the fear he had felt. He acknowledged the hesitation. He faced the reality that strength alone had not been enough. Many men never reach this point. They build walls instead of introspection. They run from the truth instead of kneeling before it. But the Spartan knew that honor cannot be restored by pretending the wound never existed. It must be reopened, cleaned, rebuilt from the inside out. In the days that followed, he repeated this ritual: walk, reflect, endure. Strip away the lies he told himself. Demand more from the man inside than the world ever demanded from him. Slowly, something began to shift. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with the quiet certainty of dawn breaking over a battlefield. He felt the weight of shame transform into the spark of determination. The echo of failure became the blueprint for victory, and the man who had walked into the wilderness was no longer the man kneeling in the dust of defeat. This was the beginning of expiation, a journey no one could witness, no one could complete for him, no one could praise him for. Honor, he realized, is not restored in public. It is rebuilt in the dark. The days that followed were not measured by sunrise or sunset, but by pain. Real pain. Chosen pain. The kind only a Spartan seeks when he knows that comfort is the enemy of rebirth. He woke before the first hint of daylight, when the world was thick with silence. Then he began, training not for strength, he already had that. Training for discipline, precision, mastery of the self. Because his failure had not come from weakness of body, but weakness of attention. He ran through the mountain passes with weighted sandals until his lungs burned like fire. In a blacksmith's forge, he carried stones up steep cliffs until his arms trembled uncontrollably. He struck the wooden post until his knuckles split and bled, then struck again, not to harden his fists, but to harden his will. Every repetition whispered the same cold truth into his bones: discipline is the price of honor. If you've ever punished yourself with improvement, if you've ever tried to erase a mistake with sweat, you already understand his world. At midday, when the sun hit its harshest angle, he practiced drills until the ground beneath him turned to mud from his own sweat. Footwork, shield angles, timing, breathing. Not once did he allow himself the luxury of good enough. Mistakes were not corrected, they were eradicated. Se essa historia esta te tocando. Comenta aqui embaixo diante voca esta assistindo e que horas são I. The outpost became his forge. The mountains became his drill instructors. The solitude became his judge. At night, his body screamed with exhaustion, but he did not relent. He meditated in complete darkness, slowing his breath, mastering the inner chaos that had betrayed him in battle. A warrior who cannot control his thoughts cannot control his spear. He remembered the teachings of the adage: a Spartan is not trained to fight the enemy. He is trained to fight himself, and with each passing day, he felt something tightening inside him, not tension, but alignment. The scattered pieces of who he was began to lock into place like a shield wall reforming after being shattered. He no longer avoided the memory of failure. He confronted it deliberately, replaying it while performing drills, while running, while striking, not to torture himself, but to wire a new response into his nerves, his reflexes, his soul. Failure stopped being a wound. It became a weapon. By the 10th day, his movements were no longer forced, they were clean, fluid, lethal. By the 20th, his mind was steady as stone. By the 30th, the outpost no longer felt like a place of exile, but a place of transformation. When he finally looked at his reflection in a pool of still mountain water, he did not see the man who had fallen. He saw the man who was preparing to return, a man reforged by discipline, a man sharpened by choice, a man ready to reclaim what he had lost. Word reached him in the mountains like a distant thunder. A new threat had risen on Sparta's borders, a raiding force, small but disciplined, moving with the precision of men who had studied Spartan tactics well enough to exploit their weaknesses. And among those weaknesses was the gap he had created. The failure he had tried to bury in sweat and stone was returning to face him, not as memory, as enemy. He stood at the edge of the ridge, wind tearing at his cloak, listening to the world shift beneath him. This was the moment every warrior eventually confronts, the test that does not care how hard you trained, how much you bled, or how deeply you repented. It cares only for who you are now. If your pulse quickens hearing this, it's because you know this feeling. Life always brings back the thing that broke you just to see if you're still the same man. Se essa historia esta te tocando, cometa aquiem baxo diant voca esta assistindo e que horas sauai. He descended the mountain without hesitation. No fear, no doubt, only purpose. When he reached the outskirts of Sparta, the warriors forming the defensive line looked at him with that same heavy silence. But something was different now. Their eyes no longer questioned, they measured. And he met their gaze without flinching. The strategos approached, face carved with age and battle scars. "You know this enemy," he said simply. The Spartan nodded. "I know my mistake," he replied, "and I will correct it." No dramatic speech, no plea for redemption, just responsibility, clean and sharp like a drawn blade. He took his place at the vulnerable flank, the same position where he had once hesitated, where the enemy had once slipped through like a shadow. But the man standing there now was not the same man who had failed. As the enemy advanced, he studied them with the calm focus of a hunter observing familiar prey. Their formation, their timing, their rhythm, every detail echoed the ghosts of his past defeat. But this time, he was ready. He waited until the exact heartbeat when their flank shifted, the same pattern he had once misread. Then he moved, not with anger, not with desperation, with precision. His spear struck first. His shield slammed into the second attacker. His voice rallied the men beside him with the force of a storm breaking open the sky. What had once been hesitation became dominance. What had once been fear became clarity. What had once been failure became mastery. When the dust settled and the enemy lay broken, the Spartan did not raise his arms in triumph. He simply exhaled a long, steady breath and stepped back into formation. He had not won to earn applause. He had not fought to prove something to others. He fought because honor demands correction, not justification. And in that battle, he corrected everything. When the final enemy fell, the battlefield grew quiet, that heavy, sacred quiet that follows a moment where fate changes direction. The Spartan stood still, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths, the iron taste of war still lingering on his tongue. Around him, his brothers tightened the formation, shields lifting, spears steady, yet every eye drifted toward him. But this time, the silence was different. Not judgment, not doubt, recognition. He had not reclaimed his honor by victory alone. Victory is common among Spartans. He had reclaimed it by confronting the precise shadow that once swallowed him, by mastering the flaw that had once defined him, by returning to the very edge where he broke and refusing to break again. And you, warrior, you know this truth in your bones. A man's honor is not restored by applause or forgiveness. It is restored when he does the one thing that terrifies him, facing the moment that once defeated him, and choosing to stand. Se essa historia esta te decando, comenta aqui embaixo dian voca esta assistindo e que horas sao I. After the battle, the Spartan walked back toward the city, not triumphantly, not proudly, but steadily like a man who has finally come home to himself. At the gates, the elders awaited him, their faces unreadable, their posture rigid as stone. Tradition forbade them from offering praise, from embracing him, from calling him a hero. But as he passed, each one placed a hand briefly over the heart, the smallest, most sacred gesture of acknowledgement in all of Sparta, a gesture reserved only for men who rise after falling. And though no words were spoken, he felt their message cut deeper than any chant of victory could. Your honor is restored. But the Spartan did not smile, for he knew honor is not a trophy, it is a duty renewed every dawn. That night, he stood alone in the training yard. The torches flickered, casting long shadows across the ground. He looked at the spear in his hand, then at the scars across his knuckles, and he understood something he had never understood before. Failure had not been his enemy. It had been his teacher, a brutal, merciless teacher, but the one he needed. And as the cool wind brushed across his face, he felt the quiet presence of his ancestors behind him, not cheering, watching, as Spartans always do. You may think this is where the story ends, but a Spartan's story never ends with redemption. It ends with responsibility. He whispered a single vow into the night, I will never allow comfort to make me soft again. Then he lifted his spear, set his stance, and resumed training, not because he had something to prove, but because he had something to protect. And that is how a Spartan rises, not once, but every day. He believed the journey was complete. He believed the weight of failure had finally been burned out of him. But the gods of Sparta rarely allow a man to walk away from a lesson without testing whether he truly learned it. 3 nights after his return, as he slept in the barracks among his brothers, he awoke with a start, not from a dream, but from the unmistakable sensation that someone was watching him. He rose silently, hand drifting to the dagger at his side, and stepped into the courtyard. The moon hung low, pale and cold, illuminating a solitary figure standing across from him. An elder, but not just any elder, the one who had trained him since he was a child. The man who had shaped him, hardened him, broken him, rebuilt him. The only person who knew exactly where his spirit was still fragile. Without speaking, the elder tossed a wooden spear at his feet. A challenge, not of combat, but of truth. The Spartan picked it up slowly. For a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt since before the mountains. A whisper of doubt. The elder saw it. Of course he did. He knew that the final enemy of every man is not on the battlefield, but inside. They circled each other in silence, the moon reflecting off the elder's eyes like steel. Then the elder asked, calm, almost gentle, can you face yourself without an enemy to blame? The question struck harder than any spear, because this was the test he had avoided his entire life. He had defeated warriors, storms, exhaustion, humiliation, but he had never faced the quiet truth that terrified him most. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of failing again. The elder stepped forward. Your honor is not restored by what you did on the field, he said. It is restored by the man you choose to be when no one is watching. And there, under the cold Spartan moon, the warrior finally understood. His journey wasn't about redemption. It was about ownership. Total, brutal, unflinching ownership of every breath, every thought, every decision. The spear slipped from his hand, not in defeat, but in acceptance. He looked the elder in the eyes and said the words he had never dared say. I am no longer afraid. The elder nodded once, then faded back into the darkness like a ghost satisfied with the living. And you, warrior, when was the last time you faced the version of yourself that you fear most? The version that still haunts your quiet moments? Maybe tonight is the night.